Welcome to the Grow Your Business podcast. Listen in as we discuss all things business, growth and marketing with business owners, thought leaders and entrepreneurs. And now, here's your host, founder of Roundhouse, the creative agency, Saul Edmonds.
Oh, hi, everyone, and welcome to the Grow Your Business podcast. Today, I'm speaking with Saylor from Tag Management Consultants around the topic, value of local diversity and inclusion in supply chains. Murray, how are you?
Mate. Great, buddy. How are you doing?
Yeah, really good. Great to have you on your podcast. It's awesome.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate the invitation and to share with brothers and sisters out there. Fantastic.
Yeah, totally. So before we get into the meat, so to speak, of the conversation, I'll just get you to tell everyone just a little bit of so they can form, a picture in their mind about, who you are. For the people that don't know Murray's going to let you know a little bit about history of business, himself, sort of services provide, and anything else you want to let everyone know about. Over to you, Murray.
Sure, brother. Look, thanks a lot. Look, my name's Saylor, Torres Strait Islander man from families from the Eastern Island group of the Torres Strait. Islands called Darnley Island and Murray Island, so that's my connections. Founded a management consultancy business, and obviously Saul, brother, you guys were part of that in regards to the brand development. And we're a management consultancy focused on procurement and supply chain management, business advisory services, and stakeholder engagement services from a cultural space. And how do I describe it to everyone is our vision is pretty much sort of ties everything together. And that is we aim to maximize opportunities to make a difference in the global village and really try to add social and commercial value to our clients, no matter if they're corporates, government, local government or community sectors here in Australia and overseas in the Pacific Asia region.
Yeah. So is your, I guess also just adding onto that too, what's your, before you started this, like what were you doing? And I guess it's easy for me because I've been through like the journey from the beginning. So I know things like quite in depth, but to give people, I guess, a little bit of an insight into why you started this, like it's, why you were doing it, and did anything you were doing before this have any specific influence on you starting your own business? Yeah,
no, brother, look, I suppose from day dot came into the world in a really dysfunctional family environment. And I suppose if there was any root or a seed that was planted, I think it was planted from the dysfunction that I experienced as a child and coming through. And that sort of fueled the fire as a young fella into obviously school and getting a degree in business and that. But work experience-wise, had about 16 years in the public service at a federal government and state government level, primarily in the Indigenous sort of affairs area around program and policy. Defence, was in defence for a fair while and served at the Army Reserves, and then spent approximately about 10 years in the private sector, primarily in the mining and resources sector with Rio Tinto and Anglo American. Primarily the focus area around that, I was just looking at developing skill sets that I'd already identified when I was doing my Bachelor of Business at James Cook University. In early 2000, mature age student around that I really clearly articulated even then that I had this inkling about, could I be an entrepreneur and could I be a business owner and could I create value for Indigenous and non-Indigenous brothers and sisters to come together. Was literally, that was 2000, that was earlier than that. I've still got my very first business plan, which I created as part of the business degree, which is funny.
Fantastic.
And it was called Saylor Consulting, and then obviously things changed. But I really did identify back then. I had spark was sort of lit doing the degree. I really liked the idea of business and what it could do, not just from a commercial perspective in regards to revenue generation for my family and myself, but more importantly, how you could use that as a conduit to create social impact in any community. So the private sector experience, identified that really, really early, and I came across this concepts of obviously procurement, supply chain management. But then, because I'd grown up culturally in the Torres Strait, we grew up with our songs, our oral histories based around traditional supply chain practices and how we coexisted with Mother Nature, and that's where the brand comes from. Tagai, which is based on a star constellation, there's a whole story around that, and I encourage all brothers and sisters. Yeah, and the Great Fisherman.
Yeah,
and I encourage anyone to go onto our website, and I know, brother, you'll share those details. But what it did do, you can imagine, those are the components. So dysfunction, education, fueled by some really wonderful people that entered my life, my family, friends, and various other mentors that have blessed my life. And also positive and negative journeys, just made sure that was able to frame that in a way to empower my life and what I wanted to achieve. And then the idea of, I was at Anglo-American working there, which was really wonderful. The team was really, really great. But I'd come into the business at a time where the commodity prices, this is about 2014, 13, 14, and the commodity prices were sort of doing around aluminium and coal in that industry was sort of going up and down, going down primarily. And was given a redundancy package, came out the front door. This is on Charlotte Street here in Brisbane, family and friends. Went around the corner, and Saul knows this journey. So I went around, and I'd already done the ideation workshops with Indigenous Business Australia, so IBA, hence our connection. And literally just went out and it solidified it. So I was just looking at the water with my box full of gear and having a beer, and I was just like, and the seagull was looking at me, and I was like what's next? And look, obviously because of the skills, I know I could have got another job, but I was like, is this an opportunity to take the jump and go into business? So the day after, I opened up my business account and then had the fright of my life, because I was like, oh, okay, I have to go from an employee mindset into an entrepreneurial mindset. And I'm sure brothers and sisters and other entrepreneurs out there, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, it's a total shift in the game. It's a total rethink about risk and various other parts, mate. Yeah.
And then that, and 100%. I was actually talking to somebody else the other day who's still relatively new to business, who's got a new business that's doing incredibly well. And it reminded me, one of the things that really reminded me about, which is I always love when you have these realizations about when you've been doing something like business or whatever it is, or some activity for a long time, and you're so in the thick of it for when you're doing it, sometimes you just forget those incremental points, like the beginning point of exactly what it was like. And when you transport yourself back, it's like, wow, I was such a newbie. Or when, like you were saying, you have to change your mindset, and you go, okay, now I'm an entrepreneur, and then you do literally become one, but then a year later you go,
yeah, it's like this.
That wasn't really being an entrepreneur. That was just like saying I was an entrepreneur. And then a year later you're like, yeah, I feel, and then 2 years later you're like, man, I was a newbie 2 years ago. And you have these incremental kind of shifts of how you view the world, even and how you view, I mean, I don't know about you, but it's especially then from, I guess, a philosophical point of view, you end up, looking to some extent at different people in new ways as well too, because your perspective about, how you even run your business, kind of, you become, you're more organized and everything, but responsibility that then you have too becomes like you have a realization about that. But I was actually just looking, I was just before we got on the podcast, I've looked at your website obviously a lot over the years as we worked on, we did the brand. But I had this really funny realization just before, after all these years on the podcast, this great metaphor that just kind of struck me. I was looking at it again. I was going about the fisherman, the story of the fisherman, and the importance in in a culture there too about navigation and astronomy. And I was going, wow, that's just so, and I'll just sort of really interested to hear what you have to say, because for some reason it just never struck me as kind of this really great metaphor for what you do about how to navigate people like through the stars and through astronomy is in that story, but that's also then what you do within your business. You're helping these organizations to navigate, which is of course right. Hey,
yes, exactly right. And brother, it's taken 6 years, so it's taken 6 years to realize that, so that's awesome. But hey, awesome brand development too, brother. It's a bit of a pitch for you. But no, it's 100%, Tagai, for me was an epitome. It was literally almost like an epiphany for me in regards to that. Sometimes education gives us this other picture and we get bought into it. And then when I took a big step back, and it was just during a visit back up to the Torres Strait, this is before I even had the idea of the business, was about almost a cultural reconnection back to my family and my roots as a seafarer and being in the Torres Strait. And I was like, if there was anything that sort of shared in one word or one concept of what I wanted to do in business, it was Tagai. It was about using various skill sets and being collaborative in a community as star points that are out there in our business universe and our entrepreneurial universe, to be able to come back, and the center of the star represents the client, it represents the community, it represents me, in a sense of those things that have informed me in my life. And all we're doing is facilitating through cultural practice, innovating business.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. I remember specifically too, and finding it very, very curious. I think it was in our very, very first meeting. And I still remember this really distinctly because it kind of struck me as something that not a lot of people talk about, was that there's obviously a very important part culturally then too of art and creating things. And your emphasis when you were talking to me about the future brand and all the work we were going to do, and speaking about that, although maybe you didn't say it specifically, but it was very obvious to me about the importance of creativity and art, and to sort of imbue it in this way. And so for me, which I suppose is an aspect of design which relates to sport, about seeing a challenge, which was, there's this big level of importance about sort of creativity and the story of the fisherman. How do you bring that into a sensibility that conveys that, but at the same time has a corporate appeal, to it? And I don't know what it is. I don't think I'll probably ever be able to put things like that into words, but it's always kind of exciting to me. It's like when you have to, it's kind of when you have to find a midpoint that does actually work, in that sense. And I think we did that obviously, but it was that was something that always struck me as very interesting, because that was a important aspect, obviously tying in very closely culturally why and the word tagline and the whole story aspect of it I've always really loved. And it's a great I think for people, because storytelling generally, like when you're talking about brand, is it's a bit of a, more than ever, it's a bit of a catch cry about people always talking about the importance of storytelling, and I think especially in your case it's like it works so incredibly well.
Mm-hmm. And look, if anyone sees the brand, I mean, once you hear the story, what it really did, and I think we did really well around the design and the storytelling piece, was I think together you were able to bring to light and to actualize a vision around the seafaring nature of what is Murray Saylor, around what I had the vision as an entrepreneur. And if I can share in short, look, it's a very recognizable brand. It really does support the pitch and the proposal discussions in regards to, they go, Tagai, what's that? And I said, well, let me share a little bit about the business. And when I do that, they literally go back, look at the logo, the brand, the logo, and go, So that explains the star, and that's water, the reflection of water on the bottom, and the various colors are various parts of what you do. And I went, you got it, 110%. And sometimes that's all that's needed, because I think sometimes in business today, I think we're so consumer-based in regards to and focused that we forget that the story in the relationships is integral in regards to that relationship that you build with a potential client.
In fact, you could almost argue, like I would almost go so far as to say, in anyone's business, no matter what it is, that is at the core, it's at the heart of everything, because it's all about those relationships. And I think, like, especially given that, like, the whole topic we're talking about is this idea of inclusion as well, and community, and like, the bigger picture for me is that whilst your business, like, has as a core part of it, I think I always wonder, whether in the wider community, like outside of what you're doing in all businesses, whether if ideas like that were implemented greatly, how much more benefit that would have, like, because that idea of, local too, having people that are local. And I'll just actually ask you just in a second too, like,
Sure.
well, I'm not in a second, like now, I'll ask you now, Murray. Where do you sort of see the, I guess, the evolution of local diversity in supply chains in Australia? And I guess, like, if there's some kind of point now where you see there's been a history and it's come from, and where you see it maybe moving to?
Yeah, I think the idea of supply diversity, and that is about the minority groups having obviously supply chain opportunity and opportunity in general, regardless in business, employment, in regards to, it's about providing a bit more equitable opportunity for all Australians. And obviously the focus area, primarily one of the areas, is around the Indigenous, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. But in regards to diversity, literally in this time of COVID-19 pandemic, the big key consideration is about local content suppliers. I mean, there's a huge value in regards to the engagement of the diversity sector. These are our sisters and our ladies, the Indigenous cultures, our new Australians that have come here, which is amazing. Our elderly, which have got a huge pool of knowledge within their thing. Also, our special needs brothers and sisters, in regards to they have a value. We have to value them. They are fellow human beings. But in this time of supply diversity and diversity in general, which is a big part of our business, as you know, in social procurement, value that we're creating for supply chains, a big part of that, which helps with the brand be able to convey this message, is the idea is that for you to create social and commercial impact in your bottom line as a business, and to your shareholders or to you and your family, the added value in regards to it is you want to be able to decrease costs. You have local diversity suppliers that are locally based. There may be some capacity building, but in the long run, you're already contributing to the community that you live in, to help bring 100%. Community and unity together.
Yeah.
Because we're not Australian, we're not white Australian, we're not black Australian. We're Australians, but we should own and also pay pride that the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures, which makes up our First Nation contribution to the Indigenous world and to the world, is all ours, and we should be proud, and there shouldn't be this barrier between. So that's where I see diversity, my brother.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I would just like to hear your thoughts too on, an argument that I hear presented. Like, it sort of crops up every now and again. You hear it in various conversations where people go, and I might add too, before saying this, I think this is usually it's founded on an idea of what people think should happen probably, is when people go, well, if you're going to, employ people for whatever a task is, it should be based on, like, their level of skill and other things, and not the fact that they are a certain sort of people, and whether they're Indigenous or female or male or sort of whatever. But, like, I've always argued the point that, one, that's an assumption then that people make, that those people aren't, that's a assumption straight away that other people who, like supposedly aren't as qualified, aren't qualified. Why wouldn't they be qualified? Plus, I think the bigger, more important point always for me is that having compassion and inclusion about giving other people a go is more important. That even if, I would say, like, say from even our point of view, I would, if I was going to employ like somebody in our business, I would never, it's not really important for me to have on paper somebody go, they're qualified in this, this, and this. That doesn't like really have any bearing on anything for me. What has bearing is that there's obviously generally a minimum skill level, but I know that people then who are probably going to be good are people who are just going to want to give things a go, because most people don't know everything when they start something, and they just don't. But most people don't. And then they go and they throw themselves into it. But people who, but just in inclusion, to that point you made, is I think a vastly underrated point of making sure people feel included, plus for the wider community, and for everyone's benefit, like as a team.
No, I suppose, and look, I don't disagree with what you're sharing. Just want to add to it is I think in business at the moment, and I think it's also an evolution in regards to how government, who's the main contributor to a lot of our business economies, have shifted from an outcomes-based approach to a strength-based approach in regards to their programs, and how that's flowed down to, as the nature of all business, large business, they'll push the risk down to our subcontractors and ourselves in regards to manage. And what I shared to a number of brothers and sisters around the idea of diversity, inclusion, and employment on all this particular piece is that there's an evolution in corporate social responsibility. Now, corporate social responsibility is not about large business. What it is about is all sectors of business. To be able to enhance your brand and what you're doing as a value proposition, one of the elements as a consumer-based environment now and service delivery is around what is that other thing that you're providing, right? What is the other thing? So you might be the cheapest in all this particular piece, but people are looking more now for what is the social value you're providing to me. And so what I share with brothers and sisters is it's not about challenging about the category piece. There's an overall question from a societal perspective is, are we doing enough? Can we do more? And why don't I employ other brothers and sisters from whatever background that they come from? So for me, I just wanted to sort of share that there's an evolution in regards to value proposition, how a business looks like as an approach. And all I'm just saying is that if you want to create more impact, really explore what you're doing from a corporate social responsibility perspective for your own business and your own entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a hugely important point too. And I guess like the other thing that I was saying too is probably from the perspective of sometimes once you're like, even before you get to that, you have to get past people's preconceptions.
That's right. Yep.
Because ultimately, if you're saying to the CEO of a big company and you're saying all those things you said, people ultimately still have to believe it's true.
Yep.
And they have to see maybe I'll rephrase that. Maybe they don't have to, but they should. Should for themselves, because as we all know, people will do things for other reasons, but the best result is if they actually believe it. If they actually think it's
a champion. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. That they actually think it's true.
And that's what we do. A number of things. It's just not about the strategy development with the client. It's also about the underground, hand in hand, going, okay, so this is what it is, and showing you the value, all that particular piece. Things that you would think that you wouldn't have to do, based on what you shared earlier around qualifications and all those particular things. The added value is that they're an elderly brother, uncle or auntie who's coming to work, and they bring all this knowledge. But it's also their value system as an individual that also comes and enriches their own organization. But sometimes, because we're so focused on about, okay, we need the output, we need all this particular piece, is that those brothers and sisters, you're given an opportunity may potentially open a door for another person that they impact and that they influence by virtue of what they're doing, to be able to think about, okay, well, I never thought about working for Microsoft, and I never thought about going to the aviation industry with Boeing or an Airbus or the such. I never thought about coming and working in a design agency like Roundhouse. If we don't have those active conversations and we aren't championing each other, it doesn't. You're right. It doesn't just start in the business. It also starts as brothers and sisters on the side of the street.
Yeah, I think that point as an underlying, like, even, point for society at like the smallest local kind of level, that's probably a far more important thing than I think anyone realizes. The power of someone, whether it's you, me, or someone's auntie, like saying then, like having this little window and going, I haven't done something for, and no, I can do that. That power of that realization always has has such an amazing effect on so many other people around them, far greater than, and it's not always quantifiable. Like, you can't go, like, it's hard to measure that, but when you see it, it's so apparent.
Like small things, like, and it's just about looking after your fellow man, no matter who they are, right? So the one question I asked your brothers and sisters who are passionate, I said, when's the last time that you offered to a coffee or a meal to someone who's homeless? Right, one black or brindle, and sometimes they're that dirty and whatever, you don't know. But what gives us the right to walk past someone when we have the opportunity to give back to them? And then the other one is, when's the last time when you've had someone at the cash register, we see this analogy all the time, where they may be a little bit short in coin, that you go and look, don't worry about it, I'll help you out.
Yeah.
Right?
100%.
I can tell you right now, I do that all the time. So it's not just about what we're doing, and this is around the diversity and inclusion piece, is that we're champions within our own champions. Yeah. Because you have a child, I have children, and I'm going, the nature of business and how I live my life, made a lot of mistakes. Don't get me wrong, my brother, but there is a realization is, look, I can't change yesterday. I can change today and tomorrow. And around this area that we've done as a business is really focused about embedding culture, our cultural practice, into how you can do business and create more social and commercial value. This way, just being good citizens and just being doing stuff that's just right.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, there's a huge power. I mean, I'm sure you'd probably agree. Like, anytime you hear like somebody's story, whether it's like, the Sylvester Stallones of the world, or someone who's become hugely successful, and they talk about in like just a really candid sort of way about all the stuff they screwed up on and all the stuff that they tried and they failed. And I was actually watching last night. We've been getting into mountain biking. And there's this young guy from Great Britain called Matt Jones, who's like who's like a Red Bull athlete. He's like amazing tricks. But he had this fantastic video, which I watched last night, of all his crashes, and which is pretty, like, it's like you're putting yourself on the line, where then you take the time to compile. Some of them are bad, like real bad.
He would have been hurt a lot.
Knocked himself out, and there was a few where he'd knocked himself out and he crashed. He did a 360 flip and just went bang on his head. And but it was really like it's that thing of not saying that people like have to put themselves on the line, but when people do that, and there's a realization that other people have that they're just like them. And that you're just like me, and it's probably the same, like you were saying, if you're just helping somebody out in the simplest way, like you help somebody across the road, well, all cliches aside, whatever, people carry on it, but it's true. Like, if you just give someone a simple hand with whatever it is, they have a realization that they're kind of like, even if it's a little bit, that they're not alone. because everyone's around each other, but
Yeah.
a lot of people feel alone. They feel like no one is like looking out for them, and then someone does that. It's like, it's not really true. Like there's people there who are willing to lend a hand, and that's at the heart of it. That's what I'm with that in mind. I'll just quickly jump over to another question that I have, if that's okay.
Sure.
About, I guess, like you were talking about different sorts of corporates and businesses that use your services. Are there any in particular that, so far, I suppose, it could be any sort of business, but are there different sort of organizations and businesses that have been using your services more specifically than others?
I think it probably comes back to the initial conversation that we had as part of the podcast, brother, and that is that the business strategy and the value proposition that I thought I'd come into the market with, and it really hasn't changed. And one of them was tied to your question is I didn't primarily on purpose I didn't literally go after the government client. Right? Really easy in regards to an Indigenous participation space because there's so much opportunity there. But in regards to what I did was I targeted the corporate sector because I just come out of obviously a very mature procurement supply chain management opportunity and profession with the mining companies. And I thought if there was going to be any value, so obviously I've still always had the social impact piece in mind, but how do I create opportunity and not convince, but be able to work with corporates and primarily large corporates to impact and evolve their organizational development and how they see supply chains. And so fast forward to what you've shared and asked, how do I term this? A lot of our work is, as I just shared, in the private sector on purpose. But what I've found is that there's a building commitment. So I wouldn't say there's this organization that is doing well and that everyone's on a different journey. Sorry, that's my point. Is that because you're almost developing and there's already champions in every organization. They may not be an executive, they may not be a director or a shareholder, they may be a project officer, they may be an admin person. But how do you create that picture to be able for everyone to come in and start thinking about inclusion and diversity, inclusion and diversity and inclusion to be into the space is that it's an evolving journey, but it's a building one. If I can just share that as a general sort of comment, and it probably doesn't answer your question. But because of what I shared earlier around the government going, look here, suppliers, you're meant to do this, and you've got to do this, and I want this outcome from this contract and all this particular piece. By virtue of that, it's almost the symbiotic relationship between the corporate sector, obviously small suppliers like ourselves, we're private sector, right? Who are the ones that are actually adding the value. It's about the collaboration opportunity. So the micro businesses, as we know, and I share very, very strongly, is that our small businesses like ourselves are the cornerstone, and it's already been identified as part of the COVID-19 recovery process. And I think the biggest strength around diversity and all this piece is by virtue of us doing business together, we've been questioning for a number of years and challenging the concept of how do we collaborate, how do we diversify the supply chain within our own supply chains.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you were going to, I'll jump straight from that into like a metaphor that popped into my head just then, which is kind of like, the stronger the bonds are within, well, say even in a spider's web or like a rope, you've got all these like tiny little strands, but rope only becomes, strong when you've got more of these little threads and they're all tightly interwoven, so, by the nature of, people doing business or people connecting or people having like, close relationships, like those little bits of rope, like those little bits of rope, I mean, it's a, that's at the heart of it. And that ties in, perfectly into, inclusion and everything that we're talking about with the main topic. Like it's I'd probably, emphasize to anyone, listening too. I mean, it's probably really apparent to many people listening anyway, but like, I think the bigger picture about this topic, whilst we're talking specifically about, certain groups of people in certain communities, the bigger picture is that it's bigger than that.
100%.
Like it's
100%.
It's all of, if we're talking, worldwide, but we're talking more Australia too. People in Australia are generally pretty nice, I think.
Yeah,
they're a good group of people. And I just always sort of ponder at just how certain, impressions come about. But it's history. It's a whole heap of stuff. But, ultimately, I think we'll just sort of wrap up at this point on that note, and just ask you then too, Murray, if you've got like anything else that you want to add, like to the topic, because I think it's a immensely important kind of area at the heart. Do you have anything else to add?
Probably the biggest piece from a business perspective as an entrepreneur to potentially fellow entrepreneurs, and also family, because an entrepreneur can be in business or it can be a family member or a person on the side of a road, right? Is that you need to, once you, I think brothers and sisters and Brother Saul, you'd understand this, is that when the switch flicks in regards to where you find your purpose in life, another thing happens. And sometimes this is what I share is around, it's about valuing your value. So once you know your value in regards to you as a human being and and where you are, and you love yourself basically and know where you want to be, things may get tough, but in regards to if you know who you are and where do you stand and what lane you're in and what value you add from your perspective, then everything else not goes away, but in regards to, it starts to, the universe, the stars align, if I can use that analogy.
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah. That's a perfect way to end the podcast. Actually, that's like, it's a great message, and I'm sure heaps of people listening would know. Like it's hard to quantify, but you do. Like I feel a bit more like that than ever before now. Like I know where I stand. I know I know why we like to do things and why we like to help people and what it means to us. And, that's great. And on that note too, I'll just ask you for a relevant quote that you like, Murray, that you like that's sort of, relevant to what we've been speaking about.
Probably for myself, I think it's probably back to our vision statement, my brother. And then obviously it's your brother's, it's my little piece, and it is about maximizing opportunities to make a difference in the global village. We all have that capability to do that. What I did fail to do at the start of our conversation, and I do apologize to all brothers and sisters and First Nation brothers and sisters who may listen to this podcast, is just want to acknowledge on our behalf our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander ancestors, elders and community members and families. They're all our cultures, as I shared with you, my brother, and I do appreciate being invited to join this space with you on the podcast. So
always a pleasure.
Family, so thanks.
always a pleasure, Murray. It's awesome. Thanks so much for sharing all those. Absolutely amazing. But what was the quote?
The quote is probably maximizing opportunities to make a difference.
Okay.
Maximize your opportunities to make a difference.
Cool. Okay, so I'll also just ask if you can let everyone know what is the best and easiest way to get in contact with you.
Yep, so our website is www.tugeyemc.com, and the best way to get in contact with us is through admin@tugeyemc.com.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Murray.
Thanks, mate. See you, family. See you.
And so with that in mind, that's actually it for today, guys. Thanks so much for listening into our podcast yet again. Before we go, please leave your feedback as well as any suggestions for any topics you would like us to discuss in future episodes. Thanks again for listening to the Grow Your Business podcast, and we'll see you again soon. Bye, guys.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Grow Your Business. Have a great day, and we'll